1965. A racist TV host publicly humiliated Bumpy Johnson on live television, calling him a savage in front of 3 million viewers. But Bumpy didn't explode with rage. Instead, he smiled. And within 30 minutes, that host lost everything: his career, his family, his entire life. How did one calm man destroy another without throwing a single punch to understand how it all led here? We go back to where it truly began. The year was 1965, and New York City was a battlefield disguised as a metropolis. The civil rights movement had set the nation ablaze, and in the heart of Manhattan, the television studios had become weapons more dangerous than any gun on the streets of Harlem. On a cold Monday evening in February, Julian Westbrook sat behind his mahogany desk at Studio 6B in Rockefeller Center, his face glowing under the hot studio lights, his voice dripping with the kind of certainty that only comes from never having been truly challenged. "Good evening, New York," Westbrook began, his voice smooth as expensive bourbon, sharp as a straight razor. "Tonight, we need to talk about the cancer growing in our city. We need to talk about the parasites who feed on the vulnerable, who poison our neighborhoods, who spread violence like a plague." He paused, letting the silence build, letting the camera zoom in on his face, on the righteous fury he had practiced in the mirror that morning. "We need to talk about the sewer rats of Harlem, and the biggest rat of them all is a man they call Bumpy Johnson." The words hung in the air like a declaration of war. Westbrook leaned forward, his eyes boring into the camera lens, speaking directly to the 3 million viewers sitting in their living rooms across the tri-state area. "Ellsworth Johnson is a criminal. He is a thug who has built an empire on the broken dreams of hard-working people. He preys on the poor. He glorifies violence. He is everything that is wrong with this city. Everything that holds back the Negro community from achieving true dignity and respectability." Westbrook's lip curled into something that wasn't quite a smile, wasn't quite a sneer, but lived somewhere in the poisonous territory between the two. "And so tonight, I am issuing a challenge. Mr. Johnson, if you have any courage at all, if you have anything to say for yourself beyond the street slang and criminal jargon, I invite you to come on this program, sit in this chair, face the questions that the good people of New York deserve answers to, or admit what we all know to be true, that you are nothing more than a savage in an expensive suit, a man too primitive to defend himself in the arena of civilized discourse." The broadcast ended, the red light blinked off, and across the city, in living rooms and bar rooms, in precinct houses and corner stores, people stopped what they were doing and stared at their television sets in shock. Julian Westbrook had just publicly humiliated the most powerful man in Harlem. He had called him a rat, a savage, a primitive. He had questioned his manhood, his intelligence, his very humanity. And everyone knew that a man like Bumpy Johnson did not accept insults like that without response. The question was not if Bumpy would retaliate. The question was how, and how bloody it would be. But what the city did not know, what Julian Westbrook could not have imagined, was that Bumpy Johnson was already 3 moves ahead. He had been expecting this. He had been waiting for it. And when the moment came, he did not respond with rage. He responded with something far more dangerous. He responded with silence. In his apartment at Lenox Terrace, Bumpy Johnson sat in his leather armchair, a glass of cognac in one hand, a book of Nietzsche in the other. The television in the corner played Westbrook's broadcast, the volume turned down, low. Bumpy did not need to hear the words clearly. He could read the hatred in Westbrook's eyes, could see the contempt in every gesture, every curl of the lip. He watched the entire segment without expression, his face carved from stone, his eyes revealing nothing. When it ended, He set down his glass. He closed his book. He looked at the three men standing in his living room. Men who had served him for years. Men who would kill for him without hesitation. Nat Pettigrew stood by the window, his massive fists clenched so tight his knuckles had gone white. Whispers leaned against the wall, his thin face twisted with fury. And Mouse, the youngest of the three, paced back and forth like a caged animal, his hand instinctively moving to the gun tucked in his waistband. "Say the word, Bumpy," Nat growled, his voice like gravel in a cement mixer. "Just say the word and I will walk into that studio and break every bone in his face. I will make him eat those words. I will make him beg for mercy in front of his cameras." Whispers nodded, his voice a dry rasp. "Man like that needs to learn respect. He needs to understand that there are lines you do not cross. He crossed every single one of them tonight." Mouse stopped pacing and turned to Bumpy, his young face burning with rage. "He called you a rat. Bumpy, a sewer rat, a savage. You cannot let that stand. The streets are watching. If you do not respond, they will think you are weak. They will think you are afraid of the white man with the microphone." Bumpy looked at each of them in turn. He understood their anger. He felt it himself, a cold fire burning in his chest. But anger without strategy was suicide. And Bumpy Johnson had not survived 4 decades in the jungle of New York by letting his emotions dictate his actions. "Sit down," Bumpy said quietly. The 3 men hesitated, then obeyed. When Bumpy spoke in that tone, that soft, almost gentle tone that somehow carried more weight than a shout, you listened. "What did you hear when you watched that broadcast?" "I heard a racist bastard running his mouth," Mouse said immediately. "I heard a dead man talking," Nat added. Bumpy shook his head. "You heard fear?" He stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the lights of Harlem stretching into the darkness. "Julian Westbrook is afraid. He is desperate. Men who are confident. Men who are secure. They don't attack like that. They do not use words like savage and primitive unless they are trying to convince themselves of something they do not truly believe." He turned back to face them. "Westbrook is not my enemy. He is a symptom. He is a mouthpiece for a system that needs me to be the monster so they can justify their own monstrosity. But he is also a man. And every man has secrets, every man has weaknesses, and desperate men make mistakes." Whispers leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "You are not going to hit him." "No," Bumpy said. "I am going to accept his invitation. I am going to go on his show." The room exploded with protests, all 3 men speaking at once, their voices overlapping in a chorus of disbelief and opposition. Bumpy raised a single hand, and the room fell silent again. "But before I go," Bumpy continued, his voice calm, measured, deadly, "I am going to know everything about Julian Westbrook, every secret, every lie, every sin. I am going to find the cracks in his armor, and when I sit across from him under those lights, I am going to pry those cracks open until his entire world falls apart." He looked at Whispers. "You have 72 hours. I want to know where his money goes. I want to know who he owes. I want to know who he loves and who he hates. I want to know what keeps him awake at 3 in the morning. Can you do that?" Whispers smiled, a thin, predatory smile. "I can do that." The investigation began immediately. Whispers was a ghost, a man who could move through the city unseen, a man who had cultivated relationships with everyone from Wall Street accountants to Hell's Kitchen bookies. He knew which palms to grease, which threats to make, which favors to call in. And within 72 hours, he had compiled a dossier on Julian Westbrook that would have made the FBI jealous. The first discovery came on Tuesday morning. Whispers sat in the back booth of a downtown diner, across from a nervous accountant named Morris who worked at Westbrook's bank. Morris owed Whispers a favor from 3 years ago, a gambling debt that had been forgiven in exchange for future cooperation. Now it was time to collect. "He is drowning," Morris whispered, sliding a manila folder across the table. "Westbrook is drowning in debt, $50,000 to a loan shark named Sal Marconi. The payments are 3 months overdue. Sal is not a patient man." Whispers opened the folder, scanned the documents, the ledgers, the bank statements. Westbrook lived like a king on television, but behind the scenes, he was hemorrhaging money, expensive suits, a penthouse apartment he could not afford, a Jaguar that was about to be repossessed. The man was living a lie, propped up by borrowed money and desperation. "Why does he owe Sal?" Whispers asked. Morris swallowed hard. "Horses, cards, roulette. Westbrook has a gambling problem. He thinks he is smarter than the odds. He keeps doubling down, thinking the next bet will save him, but the hole just keeps getting deeper." Whispers closed the folder. This was gold. This was ammunition. But he knew Bumpy would want more. He always wanted more. The second discovery came on Wednesday afternoon. Mouse followed Westbrook's wife, a brittle blonde woman named Patricia, to a hotel in Midtown. She walked into the lobby at 2 in the afternoon, her sunglasses too large, her scarf pulled too tight around her face. 30 minutes later, a man in a gray suit followed her in. Mouse recognized him immediately. Richard Holloway, the executive producer of Westbrook's network. Patricia Westbrook was having an affair with her husband's boss. Mouse watched them through the restaurant window, watched them lean close over martinis, watched Patricia laugh at something Holloway said, her hand resting on his arm with an intimacy that left no room for misunderstanding. Mouse took photographs, evidence, leverage. The third discovery came on Thursday night, and it was the bomb that would detonate Westbrook's entire world. Whispers met with a retired police sergeant named O'Malley in a bar in Queens. O'Malley was bitter, drunk, and angry at the department that had forced him into early retirement after he refused to participate in a corruption scheme. He was the kind of man who would burn bridges just to watch the smoke. "You want dirt on Westbrook," O'Malley said, his words slurred but his eyes sharp. "I have got something better than dirt. I have got proof that he is a criminal." He pulled a cassette tape from his jacket pocket, set it on the bar between them. Last year, during the protests in Harlem, the department wanted to crack down hard. They wanted to make examples of the protesters, send a message, but they needed cover. They needed someone in the media to justify the violence, to spin the narrative. Whispers stared at the tape, and Westbrook gave them that cover. "Better," O'Malley said, pushing the tape across the bar. "Westbrook took money to give them that cover, $5,000 in an envelope. I was there when the captain handed it to him. I heard Westbrook promise to run a segment painting the protesters as violent thugs, as criminals. He lied to the public. He incited hatred, and he got paid to do it." Whispers picked up the tape, held it up to the dim light of the bar. On it, in faint pencil, someone had written a date, June 14th, 1964, the night before one of the bloodiest police crackdowns Harlem had ever seen. "This is a recording?" Whispers asked. O'Malley nodded. The captain liked to keep insurance. He recorded everything. After he retired, the tapes disappeared. I kept this one. I have been waiting for the right moment to use it. Whispers slipped the tape into his pocket. This is the right moment. By Friday morning, Bumpy Johnson sat in his apartment reviewing the dossier. $50,000 in gambling debts. A wife betraying him with his boss. a son expelled from private school for drug use, and a recording that proved Julian Westbrook had accepted a bribe to spread propaganda that led to violence against innocent people. Bumpy closed the folder. He looked at Whispers. "How much does Sal want for the debt?" "50,000, Whispers said. "But for you, he will sell it for 75. He knows the value of having Bumpy Johnson owe him a favor." "Pay him 100, Bumpy said. "I want Sal to remember this. I want him to know that when I do business, I do it generously." Whispers nodded and left. By Friday evening, Bumpy Johnson owned Julian Westbrook's debt. He owned the proof of his infidelity. He owned the recording of his crime. And on Monday morning, he would walk into Studio 6B and own the man himself. The black Cadillac moved through the Monday morning traffic like a shark through dark water. Silent and predatory, Bumpy sat in the back seat, dressed in a charcoal gray suit tailored in Milan, a crisp white shirt, and a burgundy silk tie that cost more than most men in Harlem earned in a month. He looked like a diplomat. He looked like a senator. He looked like everything Julian Westbrook feared most. A black man who refused to be small. The car pulled up to the entrance of Rockefeller Center just before 10 in the morning. The building rose above them, a cathedral of steel and glass, a monument to American power and ambition. Bumpy stepped out onto the sidewalk, and immediately, the atmosphere changed. People stopped. Conversations died. Eyes widened. A black man in an expensive suit, flanked by two stone-faced bodyguards, walking toward the entrance of one of the most exclusive buildings in Manhattan. It was an affront to the natural order, a disruption in the carefully maintained segregation of the city. The doorman, a thick-necked man with a face like boiled ham, hesitated. His hand hovered near the door handle, his eyes darting between Bumpy and the growing crowd of onlookers. Protocol dictated that he open the door. Instinct told him to refuse entry. For 3 long seconds, he stood frozen, trapped between duty and prejudice. Bumpy did not speak. He simply looked at the man, his gaze steady, calm, and utterly unyielding. The doorman blinked first. He opened the door, his movements stiff, his face flushing red with humiliation and anger. "Thank you," Bumpy said softly, his voice carrying a warmth that somehow made the gratitude feel like mockery. The lobby was a vast expanse of marble and gold, echoing with the footsteps of secretaries and executives rushing to meetings, clutching briefcases and coffee cups. When Bumpy entered, the noise dropped as if someone had turned down the volume on the city itself. Heads turned. Whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through wheat. That is him. That is Bumpy Johnson. That is the gangster. What is he doing here at the reception desk? A young woman with terrified eyes and a frozen smile greeted them. "Mr. Johnson," she squeaked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mr. Westbrook is expecting you. Security will need to escort you upstairs." 2 security guards appeared, ex-cops with thick necks and hostile eyes. They looked at Bumpy the way men look at something dangerous, something that needed to be contained. The larger of the 2, a red-faced man with hands like slabs of beef, stepped forward, his voice gruff and dismissive. "Arms out," he grunted. "Standard procedure. We need to check you for weapons." Nat Pettigrew tensed, his hand moving instinctively toward his waistband. But Bumpy raised a single finger, a small gesture that carried the weight of absolute command. Nat froze. Bumpy turned to the guard, his expression calm, almost pleasant. "I am a guest of Mr. Westbrook," Bumpy said, his voice soft but carrying through the marble lobby like a gunshot. "I was invited to this building. I am unarmed. My associates are unarmed. If you touch me, I will turn around, walk out that door, and your employer will have 3 million people staring at an empty chair tonight. And I suspect by tomorrow morning, you will be looking for work on the docks." The guard hesitated. He looked at his partner. He looked at the receptionist, who had gone pale. He looked at the clock on the wall. The interview was scheduled to go live in less than an hour. If Bumpy Johnson walked out now, the network would have nothing. Westbrook would be humiliated, and this guard would be the man who caused it. The guard stepped back, his face burning with impotent rage. "Right this way," he muttered. They were led down long corridors lined with portraits of famous white men, anchors and politicians and actors whose faces stared down from the walls like judges presiding over a tribunal. Every door they passed, the typing stopped. Faces appeared in windows. Whispers followed them like a wake behind a ship. They were shown to a green room, a small space painted a sickly beige, furnished with a sagging couch and a bowl of fruit that looked 3 days past its prime. It was a deliberate insult, a reminder that no matter how expensive Bumpy's suit was, no matter how much power he wielded in Harlem, in this building, he was still just a criminal from uptown. Bumpy did not sit. He stood in the center of the room, his hands clasped behind his back, examining the space with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing a specimen. 10 minutes passed. Then the door opened, and Julian Westbrook walked in. In person. Westbrook was taller than he appeared on television, his frame lean and athletic, his hair cemented into place with enough pomade to survive a hurricane. He wore a navy suit that probably cost $2,000, a crisp white shirt, and a tie the color of fresh blood. He smelled of expensive cologne and arrogance, the scent of a man who had never been truly afraid, never been truly challenged. He did not offer his hand. He stood near the door, maintaining a careful distance, as if proximity to Bumpy might somehow contaminate him. "Mr. Johnson," Westbrook said, his voice dripping with condescension, "I am genuinely surprised you showed up. Frankly, we had a backup segment on urban renewal ready to go. I thought you might lack the nerve to face real questions." Bumpy smiled, a small, cold smile that did not reach his eyes. "I have been accused of many things, Mr. Westbrook. Cowardice has never been one of them." Westbrook chuckled, a sound empty of humor, empty of warmth. "Yes, well, the streets are one thing. This is national television. There are standards here. Decorum, civility. I wanted to come down personally to make sure we understand each other." He took a step closer, his voice dropping into the patronizing tone of a teacher addressing a slow student. "We are going to discuss Harlem. We are going to discuss your criminal activities. I expect clear, articulate answers. No street slang. No jive talk. The audience is not accustomed to your dialect. Try to speak properly, if you can. We do not want to have to provide subtitles." It was a slap across the face, brutal and deliberate. Westbrook was calling him illiterate, calling him primitive, calling him less than human. And he was doing it with a smile, wrapped in the language of professional courtesy. Bumpy's expression did not change. He looked at Westbrook with the same mild curiosity one might show a cockroach crawling across a kitchen counter. "I will do my very best to make myself understood. Julian." The use of the first name landed like a punch. Westbrook's eye twitched, his jaw tightened. In his world, in this building, he was Mr. Westbrook. He was Sir. He was not Julian. Not to a criminal. Not to a black man from Harlem. "On the air," Westbrook said sharply. "You will address me as Mr. Westbrook." Bumpy tilted his head slightly, his smile widening by a fraction of an inch. "We will see." For a moment, Westbrook stared at him, trying to find the crack in the armor, trying to locate the anger, the fear, the submission he expected to see. He found nothing. Just calm. Just stillness. Just a man who seemed utterly, terrifyingly unafraid. Westbrook turned and walked toward the door, his movements stiff, his shoulders tight. 5 minutes to air, he said without looking back. Do not be late, and try not to embarrass yourself too badly. The door closed behind him with a sharp click. Nat Pettigrew let out a breath he had been holding for 30 seconds. I could break his neck right now. Bumpy, one twist. That is all it would take. Bumpy shook his head. That is what he wants. He wants the animal. He wants the proof that we are what he says we are. If we give him violence, he wins. If we give him rage, he wins. Tonight, Nat, we are going to give him something far worse. We are going to give him the truth. A stage manager appeared at the door, a young man with a headset and a clipboard, his face pale with nerves. Mr. Johnson, we are ready for you. Bumpy adjusted his cufflinks. He checked his reflection in the small mirror on the wall. He looked perfect. He looked calm. He looked like a man walking into a courtroom where he already knew the verdict. He walked out of the green room and onto the studio floor. And the game began. Westbrook stepped onto the stage with the confidence of a man who believed he had already won. He settled into his chair, reviewed his notes one final time, and allowed the makeup artist to powder his nose. He glanced at the wooden chair positioned across from him, the hard, uncomfortable seat where Bumpy Johnson would sit. And he smiled. Everything was in place. The cameras were ready. The audience was hostile. The questions were designed to destroy. In 30 minutes, Bumpy Johnson's reputation would be in ruins, and Julian Westbrook would be the hero who brought down the king of Harlem. What Westbrook did not know, what he could not possibly imagine, was that the man walking toward him across the polished studio floor had already dismantled his entire life. The trap had been set. The bait had been taken. And now, all that remained was the execution. Westbrook blinked under the lights, his smile wide and certain, and he did not see the danger. He did not see the predator. He only saw a man from Harlem, sitting in a wooden chair, waiting to be broken. But Bumpy Johnson was not waiting to be broken. He was waiting for the cameras to go live. He was waiting for 3 million people to watch. And when that red light blinked on, when the world was watching, he would show Julian Westbrook exactly what it meant to underestimate a man who had spent his entire life turning traps into weapons. Westbrook leaned back in his leather chair, comfortable and secure, a king in his castle. He did not know that his castle was built on sand. He did not know that the foundation was already crumbling. He did not know that in less than 30 minutes. His career, his marriage, his reputation, and his future would all be gone. The stage manager began the countdown. 30 seconds. Westbrook straightened his tie. 20 seconds. He cleared his throat. 10 seconds. He smiled at the camera. 5, 4, 3, 2. The red light burned to life, and Westbrook stepped onto the stage with a victor's smile, completely unaware that he had just walked into the trap of his life. The red light on camera 1 blazed like a warning signal, and Julian Westbrook transformed. His face settled into the mask of serious journalism. His voice dropped into that familiar baritone that America had learned to trust, and he looked directly into the lens with the confidence of a man who believed he controlled reality itself. "Good evening," Westbrook began, his words smooth and measured. "I am Julian Westbrook, and this is City in Focus. Tonight, we have a special and, I must say, deeply troubling program. We are going inside the criminal underworld of Harlem, A world of violence, exploitation, and moral decay. And sitting across from me is the man whom police call the architect of that decay. Mr. Ellsworth Johnson, better known on the streets as Bumpy. He turned to face Bumpy, his expression hardening into something that resembled concern but smelled like contempt. Mr. Johnson, thank you for accepting my invitation, though I confess I am surprised you had the courage to show your face in front of decent people. The studio audience, 300 souls packed into the risers, almost entirely white, shifted in their seats. They leaned forward, hungry for the spectacle, waiting for the monster from Harlem to reveal himself. Bumpy sat perfectly still in the wooden chair. He did not fidget. He did not shift. He simply looked at Westbrook with eyes that seemed to see through skin and bone, down into the desperate, terrified soul beneath. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, almost gentle, but it carried through the studio with absolute clarity. Courage is not required to tell the truth, Mr. Westbrook. Only honesty. And I have found that honest men rarely need to insult their guests before asking them questions. Westbrook's smile flickered, just for a fraction of a second. He had not expected eloquence. He had not expected pushback delivered with such calm precision. He recovered quickly, his professional armor snapping back into place. Let us talk about your business, Mr. Johnson, Westbrook continued, his tone sharpening. You run what the police call a numbers racket. You take money from poor people, from families who can barely afford food, and you sell them false hope. You are a predator who feeds on desperation. How do you justify stealing from the very people you claim to represent? Bumpy leaned forward slightly, his hands folded in his lap, his expression thoughtful. The numbers game, Mr. Westbrook, is the poor man's stock exchange. Every day, men on Wall Street gamble with millions of dollars. They call it investment. They call it entrepreneurship. When their gambles fail and the economy collapses, the government rescues them with taxpayer money. But when a woman in Harlem puts a dime on a number, hoping to win enough to pay her electric bill, the police kick down her door and call it a crime. Can you explain to me why gambling is business downtown, but criminal activity uptown, Sue? The question hung in the air like smoke. Several members of the studio audience blinked, their expressions shifting from hostility to confusion. They had come expecting a thug. They were hearing a philosopher. Westbrook's jaw tightened. Because it is illegal, Mr. Johnson. Because the law says it is wrong. And because your business brings violence to the streets. Men die in Harlem every week because of territorial disputes over your numbers operation. Are you denying that blood has been spilled because of your activities? I deny that I am the cause of violence, Bumpy said, his voice never rising, never hardening. Violence in Harlem is born from poverty. It is born from a system that refuses to hire a black man for anything except cleaning floors and shining shoes. It is born from landlords who charge exorbitant rent for apartments with no heat in winter. It is born from police who beat teenagers for the crime of walking down the wrong street. You want to discuss blood, Mr. Westbrook? Let us discuss the blood on the hands of the banks that redline our neighborhoods. Let us discuss the blood on the hands of employers who refuse to give us opportunities. I did not create the jungle. I simply learned how to survive in it. The audience went quiet. This was not the script. This was not the angry, defensive criminal they had been promised. This was a man turning the interview into an indictment of the system itself. Westbrook felt the control slipping from his fingers like sand. He needed to hurt Bumpy, needed to provoke him, needed to make him angry. Angry men made mistakes. Angry men revealed their true nature. You talk about survival, Westbrook said, his voice dripping with disdain. But let us be honest about what you really are. You are not some Robin Hood figure. You are not a community leader. You are a criminal with a long record. You have been arrested multiple times. You spent years in prison. You never finished school. You are, to put it bluntly, an uneducated thug who got lucky. Do you really believe you have the intellectual capacity to sit here and lecture me about economics and social policy? It was a direct assault on Bumpy's intelligence, an attempt to reduce him to a stereotype, to put him back in the box where Westbrook needed him to be. Bumpy did not flinch. He did not raise his voice. He simply smiled. A small, knowing smile that made Westbrook's skin crawl. I may not have a degree from Harvard, Mr. Westbrook, Bumpy said softly. But I have a degree from Sing Sing. I have a degree from the streets where you would not last 10 minutes. And as for reading, I suspect I have read more books in my prison cell than you have read in your entire privileged life. You read teleprompters. I read history. I read philosophy. I read Nietzsche, who teaches that what does not kill you makes you stronger. I read Du Bois, who teaches that the problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color line. And I read Marcus Aurelius, who teaches that the best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury. He paused, letting the words settle over the audience like a blanket. You see, Mr. Westbrook, education is not about where you sit. It is about what you learn. And history has taught me one very important lesson. Men like you always believe you are the masters of the world, right up until the moment the world changes beneath your feet. Westbrook's face had gone from pink to red. The veins in his neck stood out like cords. He was losing, and he knew it. The audience was no longer laughing at his jokes. They were listening to Bumpy Johnson with something that looked dangerously close to respect. But Westbrook had not survived in the cutthroat world of television journalism by giving up easily. If reason would not work, he would try something else. He would use the weapon he had been saving, the nuclear option that he believed would finally break this man. The shift in tactics came with a deliberate change in Westbrook's posture. He leaned back in his chair, his expression softening into something that resembled sympathy but felt like cruelty. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, more intimate, more dangerous. You speak very eloquently about society and justice, Mr. Johnson, Westbrook said. But let us talk about something more personal. Let us talk about the legacy you are leaving. You have a daughter. Do you not, a beautiful young girl whom you dress in expensive clothes and send to private schools? Bumpy went very still. The temperature in the studio seemed to drop 10 degrees. Westbrook continued, his voice taking on a tone of false concern. I have to wonder, Mr. Johnson, what it must be like for her. To know that her father is a criminal. To know that the money paying for her education comes from exploiting poor families. To walk into school every day and wonder if the other children know who you are, what you are. Tell me, do you ever think about the shame you are causing her? Do you ever consider that no matter how much money you spend, you cannot wash away the stain of what you are? The studio audience gasped. This was beyond journalism. This was personal. This was an attack on a man's child. In the control booth, the producer leaned forward, his hand hovering over the button that would cut to commercial. But the director, sensing something extraordinary about to happen, kept the cameras rolling. Bumpy Johnson sat in that wooden chair, and for a long moment, he did not move. He did not speak. The silence stretched out, filling the studio like floodwater, rising higher and higher until it felt like everyone in the room was drowning in it. Then, slowly, deliberately, Bumpy reached into his inside jacket pocket. The security guards along the wall tensed, their hands moving toward their weapons. But Bumpy did not pull out a gun. He pulled out a folded piece of paper. He opened it carefully, smoothed it out on his knee, and then he looked up at Westbrook with eyes that held no anger, no rage, only a terrible, quiet certainty. "You made a mistake, Julian," Bumpy said, his voice dropping to a register that vibrated in the chests of everyone watching. "You thought you were interviewing a man who wanted your approval. You thought you could shame me into submission. But you forgot something very important." He held up the piece of paper. "You forgot to clean your own house before you started burning down mine." Westbrook's face went pale. His eyes locked on the paper in Bumpy's hand, and recognition flickered across his features like lightning. "This," Bumpy said, addressing the camera now, speaking directly to the 3 million people watching from their living rooms, "is a promissory note, a gambling debt, $50,000 owed to a gentleman named Sal Marconi, a loan shark who operates out of Hell's Kitchen. The debt is 3 months overdue. The interest is compounding daily, and the name on this note is Julian Westbrook." The studio erupted. The audience gasped collectively, a sound like air being sucked out of the room. Westbrook's mouth opened, but no sound came out. His hands gripped the edge of his desk so tightly his knuckles turned white. "You see," Bumpy continued, his voice calm, measured, devastating. "I know a lot of people in this city, Mr. Westbrook, and when you invited me on your show, when you called me a rat and a savage on national television, I became very curious about you, so I made some inquiries, and what I discovered was fascinating." He leaned forward, his eyes never leaving Westbrook's face. "You like to gamble, Julian. You like the horses at Saratoga. You like the poker games at the Plaza Hotel. You like to bet big, to live like you are rich, even though you are drowning in debt. And when you could not pay your debts, you became desperate. You needed money. You needed a big story, something that would boost your ratings, something that would convince the network to give you a bonus so you could pay off Sal before he sent someone to break your legs." Bumpy stood up slowly, holding the promissory note like a prosecutor holding evidence. "You did not bring me here to expose the truth about Harlem, Mr. Westbrook. You brought me here to save yourself. You thought if you destroyed Bumpy Johnson on live television, if you humiliated the black menace in front of Middle America, you would be a hero. You would get your bonus. You would pay your debts, and your secret life would remain secret." He walked toward Westbrook's desk, his movements slow and deliberate. "But here is the problem with building your life on lies, Julian. Eventually, someone finds the receipts." Whoa, Westbrook finally found his voice, though it came out as a strangled whisper. "This is slander. You are lying. I will sue you for defamation." "Slander is when you lie, Julian," Bumpy said. "This is the truth. And I own this debt now. I bought it from Sal 2 days ago, which means you do not owe him $50,000 anymore. You owe me." The words landed like a physical blow. Westbrook's face went from pale to ashen. Sweat began to bead on his forehead, cutting through his makeup like rain through dust. His carefully constructed world was collapsing in real time, broadcast live to millions of homes. But Bumpy was not finished. Not even close. He set the promissory note on Westbrook's desk, letting it sit there like a piece of evidence in a murder trial. Then he reached into his pocket again, and this time, he pulled out a photograph. He did not show it to the camera. He simply held it up so that Westbrook could see it. Westbrook's eyes went wide. His breath caught in his throat. In the photograph, clear as day, was his wife Patricia sitting in a hotel restaurant with Richard Holloway, the executive producer of the network. Their hands intertwined across the table, their faces close. their body language leaving no room for misinterpretation. "Your wife is a lovely woman, Julian," Bumpy said quietly, tucking the photograph back into his pocket. "I am sure she has her reasons for seeking comfort elsewhere. Perhaps she is tired of living with a man who gambles away their future. Perhaps she is tired of the lies. Or perhaps she simply found someone who can actually afford to take care of her." Westbrook's entire body was shaking now. The facade had crumbled completely. The confident journalist, the moral authority, the voice of righteous indignation had been reduced to a terrified man sitting in a chair, watching his life disintegrate in front of 3 million witnesses. "You asked about my daughter," Bumpy said, his voice hardening for the first time, losing its softness, becoming something cold and sharp as a blade. "You asked if she was ashamed of me. You suggested that I was staining her with my blackness, with my dirty money. So let me answer your question." He leaned down, his face inches from Westbrook's, close enough that the anchor could smell the tobacco and peppermint on his breath, close enough to see the absolute conviction burning in Bumpy's eyes. "My daughter knows exactly who I am. She knows I am a man who keeps his word. She knows I am a man who pays his debts. She knows I am a man who protects his family with everything I have. And she knows that I would never, ever sell my soul to a loan shark just to maintain an image I cannot afford." Bumpy straightened up, adjusting his cufflinks with deliberate care. "My daughter sleeps soundly at night, Julian. But I wonder, when your son goes to school tomorrow, and the other children ask him why his father is a fraud, why his mother is sleeping with his father's boss, why his family is about to lose everything, I wonder if he will be ashamed of you." Westbrook broke. The dam that had been holding back his panic finally burst, and he scrambled backward in his chair, his voice rising to a high-pitched shriek that echoed through the studio. "Cut the feed. Cut it now. Someone cut the cameras. Security. Get him out of here, get him out." But the cameras kept rolling, the red lights kept burning, and 3 million people kept watching as Julian Westbrook, the voice of moral authority, the man who had called Bumpy Johnson a savage, fell apart on live television. Yet Bumpy still was not done. He had one more weapon, one more truth that would ensure Westbrook never recovered from this night. He reached into his jacket one final time and pulled out a small cassette tape. He held it up to the light, turning it slowly so the audience could see it. "This," Bumpy said, his voice cutting through Westbrook's panicked shouts, "is a recording. It was made on June 14th of last year, the night before the police riot in Harlem. On this tape, you can hear a police captain handing Julian Westbrook $5,000 in cash, and you can hear Westbrook promise to run a news segment portraying peaceful protesters as violent criminals, to create the justification the police needed to crack down with force." The studio fell absolutely silent. Even Westbrook stopped shouting. He stared at the tape in Bumpy's hand with the expression of a man watching his own execution. "People were hurt that night," Bumpy continued, his voice low and terrible. "Innocent people, young men and women who were exercising their constitutional right to protest. They were beaten. They were arrested. Some were hospitalized. And it happened because you took money to lie to the public. You took money to incite violence against my people." He set the tape on Westbrook's desk, next to the promissory note. "You called me a predator. Julian, you called me a parasite. But I sell hope. I sell dreams. I give people in Harlem the chance to believe that tomorrow might be better than today. What do you sell? You sell fear. You sell hatred. You sell your integrity to the highest bidder. And then you have the audacity to call me a criminal." Bumpy straightened his tie, brushed an invisible piece of lint from his sleeve, and reached into his pocket one last time. This time, He pulled out a crisp $100 bill. He let it flutter down onto Westbrook's chest like a leaf falling from a dead tree. "For a cab," Bumpy said, "you are going to need it, because Sal is going to take your car, and your wife is going to take your house, and the network is going to take your job, but at least you will have cab fare." He turned his back on the wreckage, on the man who had tried to destroy him, on the studio that had been designed to humiliate him. He walked toward the exit with the same calm dignity he had walked in with, Nat and Whispers materializing from the shadows to flank him like guardian angels. Behind him, Westbrook sat in his leather chair, surrounded by the evidence of his crimes and his failures. His face buried in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. The cameras captured every moment. The red lights burned on, and America watched a man die without a single drop of blood being spilled. The stage manager finally found the presence of mind to cut to commercial, and the studio plunged into chaos. But Bumpy Johnson was already gone, walking through the marble lobby, past the stunned security guards, past the receptionist who could not meet his eyes, out into the cold night air of Manhattan. He had walked into the lion's den, and he had walked out with the lion's hide. But when Bumpy stepped out onto the sidewalk and into the waiting Cadillac, something unexpected happened, something that not even he had anticipated, something that would change everything. The studio audience sat frozen in their seats. 300 people who had come expecting entertainment and had witnessed an execution. Then, slowly, they began to stand, not with applause or cheers, but one by one, they rose, their faces marked not with hostility but with something that looked like respect. They did not clap. They simply watched Bumpy Johnson walk past them, his head high, his stride unhurried. A king leaving a battlefield he had dominated in the lobby. The receptionist who had greeted him with contempt now stood with her head bowed. As Bumpy passed, she whispered, "I am sorry, Mr. Johnson." Bumpy paused, glanced at her, and nodded once. The Cadillac rolled north through the city, crossing 110th Street, and Harlem exploded. People lined the sidewalks despite the bitter cold. Word had spread like wildfire. Young men outside pool halls raised their fists in silent salute. Women on stoops nodded with fierce approval. Children pressed their faces against cold windows, watching the car pass like it carried royalty. The fallout came swiftly. 12 hours after the broadcast, Julian Westbrook was fired, his nameplate removed, his photographs taken down, as if he had never existed. 3 days later, his wife filed for divorce and took the children to Connecticut. His friends stopped returning calls. Doors that had always been open suddenly closed. Julian Westbrook had become poison. 3 weeks after that, Whispers spotted him outside a dingy card room near Port Authority. Westbrook's suit was wrinkled, his face unshaven, his eyes hollow. He tried to talk his way into a poker game, but the doorman turned him away with disgust. His credit was no good. His name was worthless. He had become a ghost, haunting a city that had forgotten him. On a rainy Thursday evening, Bumpy Johnson sat in a booth at the Flash Inn. Staring out at the lights of Harlem, Whispers slid into the booth across from him. "They are still talking about it," Whispers said with a grin. "You are a legend, Bumpy." Bumpy shook his head slowly. The strongest man in any room is not the one who shouts the loudest. It is the one who knows when to speak and when to stay silent. Real power does not come from a microphone. It comes from knowing yourself so completely that no insult can shake you. The story of that night became part of Harlem's folklore, told and retold in barbershops and corner stores until it took on the quality of myth. The night Bumpy Johnson walked into the lion's den, and walked out with the lion's crown. And from that day forward, no one ever mentioned Bumpy Johnson's daughter again, because they had learned the most important lesson: never threaten what a man loves most. Because that is when the king stops playing games and reminds the world exactly why he wears the crown.